Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Mindy Romero, and I am the director of the USC Center for Inclusive Democracy. I'm also faculty of the Price School of Public Policy at USC. Today's webinar, as you all know, is Achieving a Representative Democracy, How to Conduct Effective Voter Outreach in 2024, and beyond. This webinar is the fifth in a series of 5 webinars that CID has put on over the last month and a half under the larger umbrella of voter turnout and outreach efforts in California. If you've joined us for any of those, you know that those have all been very data intensive. Me presenting new CID research each week relevant to voter outreach efforts in California, or understanding populations, their voting behavior, their level of awareness for information that's important to the voting process, their preferences, and their perspectives. All of that information, all of those reports that the webinars covered are available now on our website. I've already put in the chat links to all 4 of those research reports. I won't be covering any of that today. And if you are interested, not in just hopefully sharing the research reports, but viewing any of the videos or any of the webinars that you've missed previously, they are slowly being added to our website as they come available. So you can view the recordings, you can share the recordings, and of course today's webinar is recorded and will also be available soon for sharing purposes or rewatching purposes. So again, look at the chat, and in a little while, for those of you that may have just joined and missed it, I'll refresh the chat and add those links in again. So we're going to go ahead and start. We've got just an esteemed panel here today of experts from around California in different positions, different perspectives, all deeply respected in terms of their knowledge and understanding of the field, the landscape of voter outreach efforts in California, and what works and what's important, particularly in achieving a representative democracy. And of course, for today, we're really focused in on a representative electorate, voting electorate, as that will be most of our conversation. I'm going to ask my panelists to go ahead and start or turn on their videos as I introduce them and we start the conversation. Great, thank you. All right, so first, introductions. Now, I'm going to make these brief because we just have 45 minutes. All of our webinars in the series are 45 minutes, short and sweet. Again, links have been sent out right through the registration process, but also in the chat, we have links to everybody's bios, and we invite you to read more about all of our panelists if you're not already familiar with them. So in random order here, Kevin Cosney is the co-founder and associate director of the California Black Power Network. Kevin, thank you very much for joining us. Melissa Romero, Senior Legislative Affairs Manager from the California Environmental Voters. Thank you, Melissa, very much for joining us today. Kim Alexander, President of the California Voter Foundation. Kim, thank you. And last but not least, Tommy Gong, Deputy Clerk-Recorder from Contra Costa County. Thank you very much, Tommy, for joining us, or Deputy Clerk-Recorder for joining us. All right, so as I said, we're going to jump right in here now with our conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. So we're talking about achieving a representative democracy, representative electorate. But first, we've got to tackle the question of why it's important. Why is a representative voting electorate important? What are the barriers to achieving this? And I'll ask Melissa and Kim in that order to start us off and answer that question. Melissa.
Okay, it's a big question, but I love it because the reason why it's important to have a representative voting electorate is because of historically the electorate has skewed older and whiter, and we see how that undeniably kind of plays out in policymaking and investment decisions. Communities of color have been disinvested and underinvested in for many decades and centuries, and it's not by accident. And so it really is about how do we proactively address what was historically an intentional decision by taking steps to undo some of what that has resulted in. And so over the course of history, what racist policies and, exclusionary policies and disenfranchisement of people has led to is people not being represented in the electorate at the same levels as older and whiter people in the state and in the country. And like I said, that is over the course of history, that was by design, but we are at a different time and we get to decide now that we're going to take active steps to change that. And it's not the fault of the people who are not voting that they are not voting and not being represented in our democracy. And really, it's because we need the interests of all types of people, of working people, of renters, of students, and really, every life situation you can imagine represented in our electorate, in our democracy. And of course, some of the barriers to achieving this is we do have a problem with money in politics, which I think also plays into some of the social reasons as to why people have a distrust in government, have a distrust in whether or not the candidate they're voting for is truly going to do right by their community. And that money in politics issue is a really big one. And it leads to, I'll dare to say many elected officials not being responsive to their constituents. And so you also have that kind of barrier of, people rightfully so kind of in some cases have this distrust that we really have to do more to rebuild. So, some examples of like really obvious money in politics issues that have led people to, feel kind of skeptical is, look at big oil's influence on climate policy. Look at big tobacco's influence on, historically the laws that have tried to regulate that industry. Look at, big business overall, corporate agriculture. There are so many things that we know we have to do to make people's lives better, to protect people's health. But yet we still have that influence in politics, but by, big moneyed interests. And I see that as a really clear barrier, as well as the social reasons.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Kim?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. And thanks, Melissa, for your thoughts. I agree. And just to add on a couple of other ideas, I like to remind everybody, including current voters, that it is in everyone's interest for everyone to participate and feel that they have a voice and that they matter. If there are large segments of our society who feel they don't have agency in our political process, they're going to find some other way to make their voices heard. And it may not be in a peaceful way. So really, we need to engage everybody in the democratic process because that's what keeps us safe and free. There's nothing short of anything less than that. So I think it's vital that we look at those historical factors that Melissa mentioned and recognize that we need a representative democracy, one where our lawmakers represent everyone's interests, not just the people who are most likely to vote or the interest groups that finance their campaigns. And, one thing that always surprises me about a crisis is something terrible happens and the reaction of so many people is like, why isn't the government doing something about this? It's like, well, they're busy doing this business for everybody else, that it takes up all their attention. And that's the cost that we all bear by having special interest government. Some of the reasons why I think we have gotten into this situation, Melissa provided some great historical factors to consider. There's also the nature of political campaigns, and this is true across the country, where, campaigns are not interested in campaigning to people who are not likely to vote. So you get into this vicious cycle. I literally receive pounds of mail during primary elections, and there's other people that don't receive a single piece of mail at all. So I think that we have to realize that we have this, not only do we have this privately financed political process that's funded by special interests, but the campaigns and their consultants get to decide who gets informed. And they're not going to invest their precious dollars into people that they think aren't likely to vote. So the only way we're going to break out of this cycle is to look elsewhere, because you can't force candidates to campaign to certain people. They have a First Amendment right to do what they want. We need to provide more funding for election offices, more funding for nonprofits, more funding for universities, more public financing of elections to provide resources that will help educate everybody, not just the chosen few who are already voting. Elections as a field, as a field of government, are chronically underfunded. And this is the dirty little secret that people don't like to realize or recognize is that, a lot of politicians will pay lip service to election reform and expanding voter participation. But at the end of the day, it's not in their interest to change the electorate because they like who's turning out because it worked for them in the last election. So you can't really expect politicians to lead on this unless there's a crisis. You need to make election reform, funding for elections, voter education, and outreach, these issues that a lot of people say they support. If it's going to be the kind of thing that they're going to trade their political chits on in the legislature when it comes to the budget process, it's going to take massive political pressure to make that happen, or an initiative, because I don't think that the way we currently structure our campaigns, it's going to break this cycle that we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Kim, very much. And I should say, before I move on to the second question, I said that this is 45 minutes short and sweet, but I want to acknowledge what I think is obvious, that this conversation is an incredibly important one to be having, period, in many, many different forums, and could and should be much longer. But our webinar series is 45 minutes as we are trying to make each of the pieces in the larger puzzle digestible and also shareable, right? A recording that is shareable and people can learn from and hopefully promote further dialogue with. So just wanted to note that. Next question. So this is for Tommy and Kevin, and I'll ask you to take it in that order, please. From your perspectives, what are outreach methods that can work to engage, mobilize historically marginalized communities of color, young people, low-income communities? As we've heard today, we don't have a representative voting electorate. From your perspectives, what are the efforts that work? Tommy?
Yes, Mindy, thank you for having me. Yes, thank you for having me. I need to echo exactly what Kim was saying in terms of the funding for outreach and education to marginalized communities. It's non-existent basically in the 58. We'd have to check, but I would dare say I think the vast majority of the counties do not have a budget for outreach and education. And it comes down to, the law, basically. When we're caught in the middle of a budget season, especially when things aren't going so well in the economy and all for counties across the state, the direction from our county administrators is going to be only budget for what is statutorily required for you to do to conduct the election. And there is nothing in statute that requires us to do outreach and education, for example. So especially in hard budget times, those are going to be the first things that go out the window. And as well as your staffing, if you had any staffing available for outreach and education. So we're constantly battling that battle to try to have some money to be able to work with our communities. And that's exactly what we would typically try to do is, do we have the bandwidth in order to be able to educate these communities? First of all, we need to identify them. And that's a whole other, study in that alone, which, Mindy, you're doing a great job of, I got to say, with your website and all of the 58 counties that you're tracking with the census and turnout and registration statistics material. But then partnering with community-based organizations, I think, can really help at least bridge the gap in order to work within those regions that we think needs help, with registration statistics as well as turnout. And I think in really trying to reach out and work through them, that we can really get the word out. And I have noticed that in the past, I know in Contra, Costa here in 2020, when we were dealing with a pandemic, that there was a very extensive partnership with community-based organizations. We're aiming to do the same going into the November election. But again, it's that sustainability. Can we keep it going and keep building on it from election to election, and even during the off-election cycle, to engage these communities and really get them involved with, civic engagement?
Thank you very much. Kevin?
Absolutely. I'm going to piggyback off of what a lot of folks have said here today. I think the big key, right, to outreach methods and really engaging our communities is about, right, the outreach and education, right? Nothing beats face-to-face engagement, person-to-person engagement. So we know canvassing efforts, going door to door and having people in our communities talk to other people in our communities by far is the most effective way to get people engaged, to get people to understand what's happening, right? Phone banking, even peer-to-peer texting. You know, a lot of us young folks don't like to talk on the phone and get weird when it's person to person, but even at least like a direct conversation and communication with somebody will really move the needle, right? I think we have to kind of break out of what traditional campaigns will do, which is generally ignore a lot of communities, right? I think Kim and Melissa both talked about the cycles of disengagement, where if you're a low propensity voter, we're just going to skip over you, which just creates more low propensity voters, right? If this cycle I don't talk to you, then I look back at these election results and say who voted, who didn't. Well, the people that you didn't talk to probably didn't vote. And then next election, right, you're going to be looking back, well, who should we talk to? Who voted last time? The same people you talked to last time, right? So we have to break that cycle of disengagement, and we have to be engaging folks early and regularly, right? It's not enough to come in a few weeks out, a month out, and say, oh, hey, by the way, there's an election. All of a sudden you have our attention, right? Let's hit a few churches and then disappear, right? We have to have some longevity. We have to be really in conversation with folks year in, year out. And that's certainly maybe getting ahead of myself, but certainly some of what we do, right, is engage folks year in, year out, whether there's an election or not. The issues that are going on in our community are always worth talking about and worth engaging in. And certainly civic engagement, really, in my opinion, starts right on election day. The last thing I would say is that messages and messengers matter, right? And so it's not about just any education and outreach, but who is out there talking to folks does matter, right? And the more that you can have folks that are representative and part of the community talking to other community members, the more powerful it'll be. So really want to emphasize what Tommy lifted around partnering with community-based organizations, that again, they don't disappear when a campaign is over. They're in the community day in, day out, building trust. They know the issues, right, better than anybody. And so I think who is talking and who is engaging and educating voters is really important. I think there's a lot to be said around messaging. To your point, maybe we could talk about that for days, but I think how do we break through the confusion, right? How do we simplify what's at stake, what's happening, right? Oftentimes ballot measures are written in the most confusing language. Sometimes it feels like it's purposeful. There's oftentimes competing ballot measures that are doing similar things or doing opposite things. And then there's cynicism, right? I think we found that particularly with communities of color, if folks feel they can't bring them over to their side, they try to get them to stay at home and just say, you know what, neither side is for you. You're better off just not even voting. And so we have to break through that cynicism. The old kind of language of your ancestors fought and died for this, you know, it's not effective. We have to show folks what's at stake, right? What is the direct impact to your life, right here and right now. And I think clarity about process, right? Who can vote? We know that in California, there's been an array of reenfranchisement efforts to give folks back the right to vote. A lot of folks still are unclear about if they can vote or not. So being very clear about who can vote, making sure that that message is getting to those folks, and how to vote, right? We know that the Voters' Choice Act has opened up a lot of different ways, excuse me, for folks to participate in the electoral process, has expanded timelines, not only for voting, but for getting registered to vote. So making sure that folks are clear on that is really important. And the last thing I would say is in regards to some of the cynicism pieces, we found that really getting folks to understand the whole civic engagement process, not just election day, but what happens after election day. How do changes actually come about, right? You know, in some ways, voting is like, you know, getting a gym membership. You don't get fit just by getting a gym membership, just like you don't get changed just by voting. Now, ballot measures, right? There are certain laws that just go into place. But by and large, right, folks think, oh, I elected so-and-so and now everything's going to change. No, you have to stay engaged, right? You have to go to city council. You have to go to your board of supervisors. You have to engage the legislature to see this process through. And I think that can go a long way in helping combat cynicism, where people feel like I voted and nothing changed. And that is not how civic engagement works. So I think breaking through some of those myths will really be helpful, as well as really shifting who we're talking to and how we're talking to them.
Thank you very much. And I'll just take a moment, since you mentioned currently and formerly incarcerated, the reenfranchisement. We do have a research report on our website, CID's website. You can go to the same link where the other reports are. For those of you that are interested, just because there's not a lot of research on this topic, it's specific to California, and it does talk about changes in the law, but also for bringing in the perspectives of actual folks and their awareness and challenges around awareness. So I just want to call that out to people. All right, next question. So for each of you, and I'll start with Melissa, what are your organizations or your office doing to outreach to voters and potential voters, right? Very important, in the state. Melissa?
I love this question. So right now we are working on some exciting new research to do some of the things that people have talked about already, which is like identify where in the state there are underrepresented voters, who are they? And so we're really excited to be working towards a campaign on actually implementing some solutions that are really oriented around focusing outreach efforts on communities that are most underrepresented and where they are in the state. But as an organization, EnviroVoters does a lot of work in different regions of the state. So we have regional organizers in areas of the state that have historically been underrepresented and disinvested in. So we have regional organizers in the Central Valley, in the Inland Empire, and the Sierras newly, who are engaging with community members, with community-based organizations, and voters in the region long-term on issues. So not just asking them to vote during voting or the election season, but also working to pass local policy change, working to build community and build relationships for the long term, because we know that that is really what makes a difference. And we are also planning a lot of voter turnout programs that are specifically focused on non-white voters under 40 in historically low voter turnout regions. So there's quite a bit that our organizing and elections team are doing, in addition to on the legislative side, doing some of that research to really understand more of how the state could be putting resources towards areas in different counties in the state that have really high numbers of underrepresented voters. So exciting work.
Thank you very much. Kevin?
Absolutely. Again, we are a network of about 40 Black-led grassroots organizations across the state. So a lot of our work is really about mobilizing organizations and community leaders across the state to, again, what I said earlier, right? Engage their community members, engage their neighbors around elections. So we will be activating over 100 community members to engage tens of thousands of voters leading up to this fall election, again, through phone banking, door-to-door canvassing, SMS, text message, email, social media, really kind of every angle and every front that we can, right, to lift up what's at stake. But again, this work doesn't start a couple of months outside of an election. This is stuff that we do year round, every year, multiple times a year. So our work is always about building and engaging our base, even in non-election years, so they can stay engaged, again, in the civic engagement process, but also prepare for what's coming. So throughout last year, we were engaging community members just to talk about what's happening, make sure that they know the election's coming up in March. We know that the timeline has shifted. So it was important for us to make sure that folks knew that there was a primary coming. After the primary was over, we started to follow up with folks to talk about issues that are important in their community, make sure that they were getting prepared to talk to their neighbors about what's coming later. And that's what our groups are doing right now as we speak, right? Are continuing to engage people they talk to in the primary to make sure that they're ready for fall and that they can engage other people around them. So continuing to do that work to build out our outreach capacity.
Thank you very much. Kim?
We are going to be producing a new edition of our California Online Voter Guide, which is probably the oldest, longest running nonpartisan voter information guide in the world. I think we started it in 1994. We've been doing this for 30 years. The internet is a great place for people to find answers to questions that they may think are dumb questions, but really aren't. And so we like to create a site where people can feel invited and trust the information that they're receiving. We also promote online lookup tools, particularly the Secretary of State's website. Mindy, you just did some research into the ballot tracking tools that are available and how effective that can be. It is much easier now than it used to be to check your registration status, to register online, to find out where your voting place is, to find a drop box. So promoting those types of tools is always a priority. We also continuously work to promote election security and continue to make elections more secure in California. We have a very secure process, but there's always changes in technology. And one of the things that we're really focused on now is helping voters, as we did in 2022, monitor the vote count in close contests. This has become an increasingly challenging issue that's helping to foment false claims of election fraud. And so in order to tamp down on the potential cynicism that Kevin was talking about, we really have to make it transparent to the public to understand which contests are close, why they're close, how close they are, when are we going to know the results, so that we can fight back against other narratives that may end up discouraging people. And in addition, I'll be doing interviews, being a nonpartisan source for voters to help them understand what's on the ballot. Our ballots are really long and complicated, and voters always need help in that area. So I may be writing and producing a new proposition song to help voters get through the at least dozen measures that are going to be on the ballot in November. So that's some of what we've got going on at CVF.
Thank you. Okay, on to Tommy. I know that you have a few slides to show as well,
Yes.
share with us, so I'll let you.
So
Sure.
as I said, counties typically have no budget in order to do any outreach and education. But I am proud to say that at Contra Costa, we received a substantial grant, of which we actually are using a large portion of it for outreach and education, and actually working with a local public relations firm. It's our first time doing it. It's my first experience in doing it in my 21 years as an elections administrator. And so just to show you a few bits and pieces of what we've done, here's kind of a summary of the different things that are taking place. Now, of course, this has a lot to do with public trust in elections, but our firm who had done some extensive polling in our county had realized that marginalized communities have a trust issue. And I think Kevin sort of addressed that too. And so we realized that we have to work with all of our voters, but even those in marginalized communities have that trust issue. So working with our firm, multifaceted marketing campaign with print, television, radio, and digital media. The aim for this is that every adult in Contra Costa will hear our message an average of 22 times. It was mind-boggling when I heard that effort and how they will attempt to do this. Recruitment and training of election ambassadors, which I'll be talking about more, to carry that message and to educate the members of their family, of their community, of the groups that they belong to. A website that is exclusively dedicated to election security and safeguards for the public to understand. We realize that the public knows very little about the things that we do when we're conducting elections. Opportunities for the public to observe. We have what we call a certified election observer program, our CEO program. And then, of course, we established what we call our Coalition of Bay Area Election Officials, in which 11 of us in the greater Bay Area work together. It can actually be a clearinghouse potentially for community-based organizations to work through our coalition to be able to distribute materials to all 11 counties in one meeting, for example, might be a possibility. And then our efforts to reach marginalized communities is, again, it has a lot to do with focused on youth and Spanish language populations, the messaging that we're talking about, as well as our ambassadors. Targeted advertising in the geographic regions, that our elections website is both in Spanish and Chinese. Those are our two required languages in Contra Costa. Of course, translation of our advertising, which I'll show a bit of, and just on and on and on. And so it's just something that we're really proud of, that we're able to get off the ground for this election. Here are some samples through some testing. These were some things that messaging that is going to go out very shortly, in about a week or less than a week, with messaging to our public. Now, these items will also be published in both Chinese and English. So, for example, let's see if I can get here. Here's a template for, here's a template where we've created it with our PR firm so that the 11 counties can utilize this, put their own logo in there and the name of their county and utilize these, not only in English, but also in Spanish and then also in Chinese. So this is just a way to be able to communicate these notions of trust to our public, because we understand that they really don't understand as much, and then they can click to get to their county website to learn more about the election. Here is our county website that is all about trust. And of course, then it has the translations for English and or Spanish. And so it's just something that the PR firm has done for us to really focus on all of the safeguards and the security features that we have in our election system to educate the public. So it's just something we're really proud of that we've been working on with them. And also just to give a little bit of a notion of our ambassadors, we have just under 50 of them. And so they've taken the statistics and it's looking like we're having a pretty good representation of ambassadors. That was not done accidentally. I know it was consciously worked on to try to get a proper representation, as well as our region, trying to get as best as we could equal representation. We realized, like, I think where we might be a little low in just general regions is in our eastern side of our county and our west side of our county, meaning like the Richmond area. And then ethnicity, it's looking like we did a pretty good job of having a fair distribution of ambassadors who will be able to represent all of our various communities. So it's just something we're just extremely excited about, and we think that we're hoping to move the needle and be able to get some metrics out of this and see if it's a winning formula that we have, and that maybe it's something else that other counties can aspire to into the future down the road.
Thank you very much. I just want to lift up that what I'm also hearing from all of you is that you all engage in some level of collaboration and partnership, right? I mean, Kevin, literally your organization is a network, but I know also that the California Black Power Network works right with other organizations and forms coalitions. And Melissa and Kim, and certainly Tommy, I know you're talking about a Bay Area coalition, but also trying to be work with your other colleagues across the state, right? Yeah. All right. So I'm going to make our last question here. I'm going to combine a couple of thoughts and ask you to tackle it that way. You could talk about, I guess, where you see things, where you see the landscape now currently in California and where it's going. So what's needed now in terms of getting us closer to a representative electorate. Many of you've talked about the efforts, right, that you've seen, but thinking about just the landscape as it is in California, what's needed now? What are the barriers now? And then, if you can, please talk a little bit about, kind of where we're heading beyond 2024. So much of the focus is on 2024, but as many of you have already discussed, it's a long game, right? So I'll ask you to do a little bit of a lightning round here, maybe, a couple of minutes each if you can. And let's go with Kim first.
I think it's important for people to realize that people don't like to do things they feel they're not good at. And voting is hard. And I really push back when people say, oh, it's easy to vote. It's not easy to vote. This is just one page of my ballot from June. There's a whole nother page. There's a lot to fill out. There's a lot to study. It's a huge investment of time and energy. And people are making rational decisions about whether they want to invest that time or energy. So you have to realize that asking someone to vote is asking them to spend hours and hours of time to try to arrive at informed decisions. And you have to also realize that a lot of people in our state don't live in a pro-voting environment. Their parents don't vote. Their parents might be saying it's a waste of time. Their friends aren't voting. So I love Tommy's ambassador approach. I think it's really what we need. Also, what Kevin and Melissa are doing, going into communities with CBOs that have trust among those folks that we're trying to engage is really vitally important. But friends and family and those trusted messengers are really key. I think we should add a choice to the ballot. I've said this for many years, to give people the option to skip this contest and to know that they don't have to have an answer for every question on the ballot. Those propositions are really hard. And I think for a lot of people, the only thing worse than not voting is voting wrong on something, finding out later that you voted differently than actually in your interest. That feels terrible. So we want people to have a positive first time experience when they vote, so they'll want to do it again. I think we should reduce the number of things on the ballot if we can. We should get rid of some of our statewide offices. We should try to get more initiatives knocked off the ballot if we can. I think we should send just one book. I think it's crazy that the county send one book and the state sends another book and they come at different times and your ballot comes in the middle. I mean, that just adds to the confusion. So going back to what Kevin said, this issue of confusion is major. I get confused and I do this full time. And so I just can't even imagine how challenging it is for somebody who's got 2 jobs, working in school, taking the bus, doesn't own a car, couch surfing, whatever their barriers are. They don't have that luxury of time that many of our regular voters do. So we need to make it more streamlined, make the voting experience more consistent among counties so that people can help each other across counties. And of course, funding for elections, I'm always going to throw in a plug for that. One of the most under-resourced sectors of public life in this country. And last but not least, civic education in schools. I mean, I think we really have to get back to that place where there is this opportunity to connect with people when you have their attention. There's a lot of research that shows if young people aren't hooked into voting while they're in high school, and they don't go on to college, we're going to lose them permanently. So we really need to amp up the civic education.
Thanks very much. Melissa.
Okay.
I gave you guys a big question. I apologize for a short time.
It's a really good, all these questions have been so great. And to answer the question of what does the landscape look like right now? To Tommy's point, it's very different depending on where you are. You have some counties who are pretty great at prioritizing voter education and outreach in an accessible way and an inclusive way. And then you have counties that are really not. So, depending on where you live, you may get an entirely different experience. And so state dollars could really do a lot to both fund counties to do this important work and also community-based organizations to do that, in the neighborhood, I'm literally your neighbor type of work where it's not just during election season that you're hearing from people. That is really the opportunity, is to invest in those voter education and outreach efforts at the county level, at the community-based organization level. And the big barrier to that is that we have a really volatile state budget. I mean, we're way up here, the super, a ton of money one year, and then, now we have a $50+ billion deficit. So that is really the challenge, but I can't think of anything more worthwhile to invest in than our democracy functioning and having people be represented. So, to me, it's not a hard case to make, but, to your point, Mindy, earlier, there are elected officials who don't really want to see things change in terms of who's in the electorate. So, it's a money thing and it's also that ideology thing. So that's, really in the long term, that's what we're pushing for at EnviroVoters. In coalition with a lot of other groups who feel the same, is to invest in voter education and outreach. We need to eliminate the possibility that someone did not turn out to vote for lack of information about an early voting center right down the street from their work, or lack of information about where to find some info about a candidate that's running, so that really is the barrier and the opportunity there. But we do have to fund community-based organizations for sure, because that is also going to not only help get the information to people, but it's also going to help to create that culture of voting we're talking about. These are people that are in your own community who are in it for the long haul, working to make your community better, providing critical services to your community in many cases. So that is it.
Thank you. Tommy, I'm going by order of my screen for this.
Okay. So yeah, I agree completely with what Melissa is saying, that it can be totally different from one county to another. And I think what needs to happen is we need to create a model of success of how this could work for a small, for a medium, and for large counties. So that way there is a formula, there is a way that counties who don't have a program can actually, get a shot in the arm and be able to say, oh, so-and-so has done this. I think this is something we can do as a result then. But along with that does need funding. And somehow we need to find a mechanism that can assist with all of these efforts. And, if it be a legislation, legislatively, perhaps could be a way to do this, to identify, how you go about doing this. I don't want to be draconian or anything, but it's just a way, unless we put some requirement on counties to do this, I think we're always going to be at the mercy of our budgets. And I think our election officials recognize this. I mean, I know there are always election officials that wish they could do more, but our hands are tied. We have to be laser focused on our mission to conduct the election. In order to be able to do the outreach and education, we have to have another arm to the election department in order to do this good work. And so we need to find a vehicle in which we can make this happen.
Thank you very much. And I don't know if I made this announcement in the beginning, but if anyone does have a question for our panel, you can put it into the Q&A. Kevin, you get the last word.
Well, first of all, I have to echo what everyone has said here, because it's worth saying 4 times over. We certainly need more money in not only the voter outreach and education piece, but also the research, right, piece that many folks have talked about. We know that there are still disparities, right, even with some of the reforms around elections. And so getting down to the root of that, the who and the how, is really important. Mindy, as you mentioned earlier, right, California Black Power Network is part of the Million Voters Project, which is a coalition of coalitions who coordinate, again, year-round activities and engaging voters, making sure that we're aligned, making sure that we're not duplicating efforts. So investing in those types of efforts, building partnerships with those types of efforts are really crucial to maintaining that engagement and that understanding of what's happening. I think counter to that, right, and kind of to speak to the state of California's election cycle, it's been said again many times, right? There's not only a slew of ballot initiatives, but even more money that's getting thrown around, right? Year after year, cycle after cycle, I should say, we see tens of millions of dollars from big oil, big pharma, and other big corporations throwing money at ballot initiatives. And then again, seeing very little resources, right, for community-based organizations to engage in the community. So I think those are really important in both investing in community-based outreach and limiting, right, corporate influence and thinking about campaign finance reform, right? I think there's still efforts around reenfranchisement, right, to reinstate the right to vote for folks who are currently incarcerated. There was an effort, ACA 4, Free the Vote, that was working towards that. And there's still work to be done around some of the reenfranchisement efforts that have been passed to make sure that folks actually have mechanisms to vote in jails and make sure that folks are actually exercising and have access to those rights. I think there's things like SB 299, to really improve current automatic registration systems that would go a long way. And again, just removing barriers to even how you get registered. I think opportunities for community to engage in decision-making, like participatory budgeting, can go a long way, again, in seeing how people can engage in these processes, and that there is efficacy. They do have power over how things work in government. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Wow. This has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate all of you coming today virtually to share your perspectives and your experience. Again, for those that are viewing this and aren't familiar, these are 4 very respected leaders in our state in this area. So I want to just lift up one last thing here. Basically, we've been talking about a lot of things, but I think all of you have discussed in one way or another the fact that we have an inequitable outreach landscape. And that is something that I've been emphasizing through this whole series. And actually starting the previous 4 webinars that have been data focused, I actually begun each of those really emphasizing that important point that I think only until maybe now, really recently, are we really starting to talk about that fact in our state and acknowledge it as a key contributor, not the only contributor, but a key contributor to the very fact that we don't have a representative electorate, that we have significant disparities in voter turnout by race, age, ethnicity, income, and the list goes on. So an equitable outreach landscape, that all of the work that all of you are doing, you are, if I may, you're fighting an uphill battle because of the very fact of, as Kim pointed out in the beginning, and I know all of you have touched on, that we have a electoral system that the overwhelming majority, the vast majority of the outreach that is conducted by campaigns and candidates that have their own specific purposes. And whole swaths of our electorate or potential electorate do not receive very much outreach, some none at all. And then the efforts that all of you are doing, right, are the scale of need. There's not enough resources to meet the scale of need. So I just wanted to emphasize that. It doesn't look like we have any questions. We have some lovely comments, but no questions. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I want to thank again Kevin, Melissa, Kim, and Tommy. And the real impact we think of these, in addition to those that are viewing us, is that we have, we will soon have all of the recordings available. The impact of this series, we hope, will continue to live on. And we welcome everyone, invite everyone to share all of these recordings and maybe share them together, and view also the reports that I put into the chat. Thank you all very, very much. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks for joining us.